Part 1. The Whispers of Tomar. They say the stones themselves whisper in Tomar. They speak of secrets buried deep beneath the cobblestones, of rituals performed under the cloak of darkness, of a power both revered and feared. Tomar, nestled in the heart of Portugal, a town steeped in history, its very foundations intertwined with the enigmatic Knights Templar. I, like many others, was drawn to its mystique, to the legends that clung to the crumbling walls of the Convento de Cristo, once the Templar headquarters in Portugal. But my fascination led me down a path far darker than I could have ever imagined, a path that culminated in a single, terrifying night within the Forbidden Chapel. The story begins, as most stories do, innocently enough. I was researching the Templars, delving into the labyrinthine archives, poring over ancient texts and crumbling parchments. My obsession, some might call it, was with uncovering the truth behind their sudden downfall, their abrupt dissolution ordered by Pope Clement V in the early 14th century. Were they heretics, as the Church claimed, or were they victims of a conspiracy, their wealth and power coveted by a greedy king? The more I researched, the more I realized how little was truly known, how many questions remained unanswered. The official narrative seemed incomplete. There were gaps, inconsistencies, whispers of hidden truths. My research led me to Tomar, to the very heart of the Templar legacy, the Convento de Cristo, a sprawling complex of churches, cloisters, and fortifications, stood as a testament to their power and influence. Within its walls, I felt a palpable sense of history, a weight of centuries pressing down on me. I spent days exploring the grounds, tracing the outlines of the Templar symbols carved into the stone, imagining the knights who had once walked these very halls. I spoke with local historians, with curators, with the keepers of the town's collective memory. Each conversation added another layer to the mystery, another piece to the puzzle I was desperately trying to assemble. One elderly woman, her face etched with the wisdom of generations, spoke of a hidden chapel, a place forbidden to outsiders, a place where the Templars conducted their most secret rituals. She described it in hushed tones, her voice barely a whisper, as if afraid the very act of speaking would unleash some ancient curse. The chapel, she said, was located deep beneath the convento, accessible only through a hidden passage. Its entrance was concealed, masked by an unremarkable section of wall. She warned me against seeking it out, against disturbing the spirits that dwelled within. But her warning, like most warnings, only served to fuel my curiosity. Days turned into weeks as I searched for any evidence of this hidden chapel. I studied old blueprints, consulted forgotten maps, and scoured every inch of the convento. I questioned the guards, the groundskeepers, anyone who might possess a sliver of information. Most dismissed the old woman's story as folklore, a local legend passed down through generations. But I refused to give up. I sensed, deep within my gut, that there was more to this story than met the eye. Finally, after weeks of relentless searching, I stumbled upon a clue. Hidden within a dusty archive, tucked away in the back of a forgotten shelf, I found a tattered manuscript. It was written in Latin, the ink faded, and the pages brittle with age. It described, in cryptic detail, the location of the hidden chapel, the rituals performed within, and the secrets guarded within its walls. The manuscript spoke of a powerful artifact, a relic of immense power, hidden within the chapel. It was this artifact, the manuscript claimed, that held the key to understanding the true nature of the Templars and their sudden demise. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I knew I had to find the chapel. The risks, I understood, were significant, but the potential reward, the chance to uncover a truth hidden for centuries, was too tempting to resist. I knew I was stepping into the unknown, into a realm of shadows and secrets. But I was driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, a desire to unravel the mysteries of the past. Little did I know, as I prepared to descend into the depths of the convento, that I was about to embark on the most terrifying night of my life. A night I would never forget. A night I barely survived. I survived a night in the Templars' Forbidden Chapel, Part 2 of 25. The morning light, weak and hesitant, filtered through the chapel's grimy, stained-glass window, depicting a gaunt, haloed figure I couldn't quite place. It felt less like a depiction of a saint and more like a warning. My body ached, the cold stone floor having offered little comfort. The events of the night pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. The chanting, the shadows, the thing. I cautiously pushed myself to my feet, every joint protesting. The chapel and the cold light of day seemed smaller, less imposing, yet somehow more sinister. The altar, stained darker in places I couldn't explain, held a residue of something. A faint, metallic tang hung in the air, mingling with the musty odor of aged stone and something else, something acrid, like burnt hair. I needed to leave, now. But the heavy oak door, the one I'd struggled with for hours last night, now swung open with a groan, revealing the overgrown courtyard bathed in a pallid sunlight. This easy escape felt wrong. A lure. Hesitantly, I stepped out, the overgrown grass crunching beneath my boots. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if holding its breath. The courtyard was encircled by high stone walls, topped with crumbling battlements. Ivy, thick and dark, clung to the stones like grasping claws. In the center, a dried-up fountain stood like a skeletal hand reaching towards the sky. The entire place radiated a sense of decay, of forgotten secrets. I walked towards the fountain, drawn by an inexplicable pull. As I neared, I noticed something glinting in the basin. Reaching down, I pulled out a small, tarnished silver pendant. It was circular, engraved with a complex symbol I couldn't decipher. It looked vaguely familiar, like something I'd seen in a history book, but the memory remained frustratingly elusive. As I turned the pendant over in my hand, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The courtyard seemed to shimmer, the walls wavering like heat haze. I clutched the pendant tighter, my heart pounding against my ribs. The dizziness subsided as quickly as it had come, leaving me feeling disoriented and uneasy. I scanned the courtyard again, searching for something, I wasn't sure what. A change, a clue, anything that could explain the unsettling sensation that had just washed over me. Then I saw it, scratched into the stone rim of the fountain, almost hidden beneath a thick layer of moss, were a series of symbols. They were similar to the one on the pendant, but arranged in a circular pattern. I traced them with my fingertip, the cold stone sending a shiver down my spine. A low growl echoed from somewhere within the chapel, making me jump. I spun around, staring at the open doorway. The shadows within seemed to deepen, coalescing into something. I couldn't make out a distinct shape, but I could feel its presence, malevolent and watchful. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the doorway. I needed to get out of here, to find someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. But a strange compulsion kept me rooted to the spot. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, something vital. I turned back to the fountain, my gaze drawn back to the engraved symbols. The pendant in my hand felt warm, almost vibrating. I held it closer to the inscription, aligning the symbol with the corresponding one on the fountain. As the two symbols touched, a low hum filled the air, growing in intensity until it vibrated through my bones. The ground beneath my feet trembled. The shadows in the chapel doorway writhed and pulsed, the growling intensifying. The stone of the fountain began to glow with an eerie, pulsating light, the symbols radiating outwards like ripples in a pond. The light intensified, blinding me. I squeezed my eyes shut, my ears ringing with the now deafening hum. Then, silence. I cautiously opened my eyes. The light was gone. The humming had ceased. The courtyard appeared unchanged, yet the air felt different, charged. The shadows in the chapel doorway were gone. My hand was empty. The pendant was missing. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back, my legs weak. What had just happened? Where was the pendant? What were those symbols? I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was not alone, that something was watching me, waiting, and that the night in the chapel was only the beginning. My escape from the courtyard was less a conscious decision and more a primal flight response. I scrambled over the crumbling wall, tearing my clothes and scraping my skin in my frantic escape. I didn't stop running until I reached the village. The familiar sights and sounds, a fragile reassurance in the face of the growing terror that gripped me. I knew I couldn't tell anyone what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. They wouldn't believe me. They'd think I was mad. But the chilling memory of the shadows, the chanting, the pendant, and the symbols burned into my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within the Templars' forbidden chapel. And I knew, with a sickening dread, that it wasn't finished with me. I survived a night in the Templars' forbidden chapel. Part 3. The silence in the crypt was deafening, broken only by the erratic thump of my own heart. The chanting had stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving a void more terrifying than the sound itself. I held the Templar's journal tighter, its leather cover cold against my clammy skin. The flickering candlelight danced across the aged pages, illuminating a passage I hadn't noticed before. A single word scrawled in the margins in a shaky hand, a stark contrast to the neat script of the main text. Claustrum. Claustrum, Latin for prison or enclosure. My stomach churned. The crypt, already oppressive, felt smaller, the air thicker. The word echoed in my mind, a chilling premonition of what might be hidden within this sacred space. The Templars' meticulous notes describe the chapel's construction, the rituals performed within, the experiments. But this single word, claustrum, felt different, a whispered warning from beyond the grave. Armed with nothing but a dwindling candle and a growing sense of dread, I continued deeper into the crypt. The air grew noticeably colder, a stark contrast to the mild autumn night outside. A faint, earthy scent hung in the air, something akin to damp soil and decaying leaves. It wasn't the smell of death, not exactly, but something older, something primal. I passed row upon row of stone sarcophagi, their surfaces worn smooth by the passage of time. Some bore elaborate carvings of knights in full regalia, their swords crossed over their chests. Others were plain, unmarked, their occupants lost to anonymity. Each one felt like a silent sentinel, watching me, judging me. The passage narrowed, forcing me to squeeze between two imposing tombs. As I shuffled forward, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I recoiled, nearly dropping the candle. Pressing myself against the opposite wall, I held the flickering flame closer. Protruding from the stonework was a small, iron ring, almost swallowed by the shadows. Hesitantly, I reached out and touched it again. It was cold, unyielding. I pulled. Nothing. I pulled harder, putting my weight behind it. With a grinding screech that echoed through the silent crypt, a section of the wall swung inwards, revealing a narrow opening. The claustrum. The air rushing out from the opening was icy, carrying the same earthy scent, but intensified, almost overpowering. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I had to steady myself against the tomb. Peering into the darkness, I could see nothing but an impenetrable blackness. The flickering candlelight couldn't penetrate the gloom. Fear gnawed at me, urging me to turn back, to flee this cursed place. But the word claustrum echoed in my mind. The Templar had hidden something here, something important enough to warrant a secret chamber, something he hadn't dared to commit to the pages of his journal. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the darkness. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders. The stone was damp and slick beneath my fingers, and I moved slowly, cautiously, feeling my way along the walls. The air grew colder with each step, biting at my exposed skin. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a small, circular chamber. The air was still, heavy, the earthy scent almost suffocating. Holding the candle aloft, I surveyed my surroundings. The walls were lined with shelves, stacked with clay jars of varying sizes. Some were sealed with wax, others were open, their contents long since turned to dust. In the center of the chamber, a single stone altar stood bathed in the flickering candlelight. On its surface lay a small, leather-bound book, similar in size and style to the Templar's journal. I approached the altar cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached for the book, a faint whisper seemed to brush against my ear. I froze, straining to hear. The whisper came again, closer this time, a sibilant hiss that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound sent a shiver down my spine. It was a voice ancient and malevolent, a voice that spoke of things best left undisturbed. Ignoring the primal fear that gripped me, I picked up the book. The leather was dry and brittle, crumbling beneath my fingertips. The cover was blank, devoid of any markings. I opened it carefully, the pages stiff and resistant. The script within was unlike anything I had ever seen before, a series of intricate symbols and glyphs. As I scanned the pages, a wave of nausea washed over me. The symbols swam before my eyes, twisting and contorting, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and pulsate on the page. The whispering intensified, growing louder, more insistent. The air in the chamber seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy. I felt a pressure building in my head, a searing pain behind my eyes. The candle flickered violently, threatening to extinguish itself. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the darkness behind the shelves. It was a guttural sound, filled with a primal rage that made my blood run cold. I slammed the book shut, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the scraping of claws against stone. I had to get out, now. Turning, I fled back into the narrow passage, the book clutched tightly in my hand. The whispering pursued me, growing louder with each step, the growl echoing close behind. The darkness seemed to reach out, grasping at my heels. I stumbled blindly through the passage, my heart pounding in my chest, the primal fear threatening to overwhelm me. As I reached the opening, I risked a glance over my shoulder. In the flickering candlelight, I saw it. A fleeting glimpse of something dark and shapeless, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was moving towards me, slowly, deliberately, its growl a promise of unspeakable horrors. I scrambled out of the passage, slamming the stone door shut behind me. The iron ring clanged against the stone, the sound echoing through the silent crypt. I leaned against the cold wall, gasping for breath, the book clutched tightly in my hand, the whispering still echoing in my ears. I had escaped the claustrum, but I knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever lurked within wouldn't remain confined for long. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 4. The chanting had stopped. The suffocating dread, however, hadn't. It clung to me like the damp chill of the chapel, seeping into my bones. The heavy oak door, the only exit I could see, remained stubbornly closed. Sunlight, a cruel mockery, streamed through the stained glass window depicting a crowned skeleton holding a chalice. The grotesque image seemed to shift and writhe in the light, its bony finger pointing directly at me. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I needed to move, to do something, anything, other than stand frozen in the center of that unholy space. I cautiously approached the altar, my boots echoing in the unsettling silence. The remnants of the ritual remained, a scattering of withered herbs, a shallow earthenware bowl stained dark, and the unsettlingly familiar silver dagger. I picked it up gingerly, its weight surprisingly substantial. The blade was still sharp, reflecting the distorted colors of the stained glass. A strange, almost magnetic pull emanated from it, tempting me to run my fingers along the edge. I resisted. The dagger felt wrong, imbued with a malevolent energy that resonated with the unease twisting in my gut. Turning my back on the altar, I began to examine the walls. The stone was cold and rough beneath my fingertips, carved with intricate symbols I couldn't decipher. They seemed ancient, older even than the chapel itself, hinting at something predating the Templars, something far more sinister. Among the symbols I found several small niches, each containing a small leather-bound book. My hands trembled as I pulled one out. The leather was dry and cracked, crumbling at my touch. The pages, yellowed with age, were filled with a spidery script I couldn't read. It wasn't Latin, nor Greek, nor any language I recognized. It looked inhuman. As I flipped through the pages, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the lone candle I had lit earlier, plunging the chapel into near darkness. The stained glass window now glowed with an eerie, internal luminescence, bathing the skeleton in an unsettling, otherworldly light. A low groan echoed from the depths of the chapel, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I fumbled for my lighter, my fingers numb with fear, finally managing to ignite the flame. The small circle of light offered little comfort, only serving to accentuate the oppressive darkness that clung to the edges of the chapel. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing. The groan came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of scraping stone. Something was moving in the darkness, something large. Clutching the book to my chest, I moved cautiously along the wall, my eyes darting nervously around the chapel. The scraping sound grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. I reached the heavy oak door and rattled the handle, still locked. Desperation clawed at me. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but my cries were swallowed by the thick stone walls. The growling was now right behind me, hot, fetid breath brushing against my neck. I whirled around, lighter held high, and saw it. A hulking shape emerged from the shadows, its form barely discernible in the flickering light. It was humanoid, but grotesquely distorted, its limbs long and spindly, its head elongated and misshapen. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over protruding bones. Its eyes, two burning coals of crimson, fixed on me with a hunger that chilled me to the core. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose stone and falling heavily to the ground. The book flew from my grasp, landing open on the stone floor. The creature lunged, its skeletal fingers reaching for me. I scrambled back, desperate to escape its grasp. As the creature loomed over me, I caught a glimpse of the open book. The strange script seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, and as I looked closer, I realized it was moving. The symbols were rearranging themselves, forming words, sentences, a chilling incantation. And then the creature froze. Its burning eyes widened, fixated on the book. A low whine escaped its throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. It backed away slowly, its movements jerky and unnatural. It turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. The scraping sound faded, replaced by a heavy silence that was almost as terrifying as the growls had been. I lay there for a long time, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The lighter slipped from my numb fingers, plunging the chapel back into darkness. The only light came from the stained glass window, the skeletal figure now seeming to grin triumphantly down at me. I had survived, for now, but the night was far from over, and I knew with a chilling certainty that the horrors of the Templars' Forbidden Chapel were just beginning. I survived a night in the Templars' Forbidden Chapel, Part 5. The chilling whisper, "He's coming," echoed in the suffocating silence, a promise more terrifying than any scream. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Father Michael's eyes, wide with a primal fear I'd never seen in a man of God, darted towards the chapel's entrance. The thick wooden door remained closed, but the air itself seemed to vibrate, a low hum resonating deep within the stone walls. "We need to get out of here," I choked out, the words catching in my dry throat. Father Michael shook his head, his face a mask of despair. "It's too late. The ritual has begun." Ritual? What ritual? My mind raced, trying to piece together the cryptic warnings, the unsettling atmosphere, and the palpable dread hanging heavy in the air. The faded frescoes on the walls, depicting scenes of knights and esoteric symbols, suddenly seemed less like historical artifacts and more like instructions, a blueprint for something dark and unholy. The humming intensified, morphing into a low, guttural chant. It seemed to emanate from beneath the chapel floor, as if the very earth itself was crying out in agony. The air grew colder, and a putrid metallic smell, like old blood and burnt incense, filled my nostrils. Then, the door began to creak open. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for whatever horror awaited. The chanting swelled, and a cold, skeletal hand reached into the chapel, its fingers long and gnarled, the skin stretched taut over bone. A gasp escaped my lips. The hand beckoned. Father Michael whimpered, scrambling backwards until he hit the altar. He clutched the crucifix hanging around his neck, his knuckles white. The hand remained, a silent command in the flickering candlelight. "We have to go," I whispered again, tugging at Father Michael's sleeve. "We have to try." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange resignation. "There's nowhere to go, child. He demands an offering." An offering? The words were barely audible, lost in the rising crescendo of the chant. The hand retreated, and a figure emerged from the darkness. My blood ran cold. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was tall and gaunt, draped in a tattered Templar robe. Its face was obscured by a deep cowl, but I could see the glint of something unnatural within its depths, a malevolent intelligence that seemed to pierce through me, dissecting my very soul. The figure glided towards us, its movements unnatural, almost ethereal. With each step, the chanting grew louder, the air thicker, the stench of decay more overpowering. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, frozen in place by an unseen force. The figure stopped before the altar, its presence radiating an aura of ancient evil. It raised a hand, and the chanting abruptly ceased. A silence descended upon the chapel, heavier and more oppressive than the noise that preceded it. Then, in a voice that rasped like grinding stones, the figure spoke. "The blood of the innocent will cleanse the earth." My mind reeled. Blood? Innocent? What was happening? Father Michael began to sob, his body trembling uncontrollably. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terror I could barely comprehend. "Forgive me, child," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I had no choice." He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. I stumbled backward, shock coursing through me. Father Michael, the gentle, kind priest, was trying to kill me. I dodged his grasp, scrambling away from him, towards the chapel door. The figure stood motionless, watching the scene unfold with an unnerving calmness. It was as if it had orchestrated this, a twisted puppeteer pulling the strings of our fear. Father Michael, driven by some unseen force, lunged again. I ducked under his outstretched arms, the crucifix he wore swinging wildly. I stumbled and fell, hitting the cold stone floor hard. He was on top of me in an instant, his eyes wild, his hands tightening around my neck. I gasped for air, my vision blurring. The chanting began again, soft at first, then growing steadily louder, echoing the frantic beating of my heart. The figure in the robe remained silent, a terrifyingly passive observer to my impending demise. I was trapped, an offering on the altar of some ancient, unholy ritual. Just as I felt consciousness slipping away, a blinding light erupted from the altar. Father Michael screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman wail that echoed through the chapel. He recoiled, his hands flying to his face. I scrambled back, gasping for breath, trying to understand what was happening. The figure in the robe turned towards the altar, its cowl falling back to reveal nothing. There was no face, just a swirling vortex of darkness, a void where features should have been. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the air vibrating with an almost unbearable intensity. And then, everything went black. I survived a night in the Templars' Forbidden Chapel, Part 6. The chanting swelled, no longer a distant murmur but a guttural, resonating presence that seemed to vibrate within my very bones. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped my heart as I pressed myself against the rough stone wall, the dampness seeping through my clothes. The single torch I carried flickered wildly, casting dancing, grotesque shadows that morphed into monstrous shapes. The spiral staircase, my only escape route, seemed to stretch endlessly upwards, a dizzying ascent into an unknown darkness. I couldn't stay here. Whatever ritual was taking place below, it was growing in intensity, and a primal instinct screamed at me to flee. I took a hesitant step onto the stairs, the worn stone cold beneath my bare feet. Each upward step was accompanied by a creak, an agonizingly loud betrayal in the echoing silence. The chanting grew louder, interspersed now with a rhythmic thumping, like a giant heart beating in the earth itself. Halfway up the spiral, I paused, my breath catching in my throat. A shadow flickered at the top of the stairs. Not the dance of the torchlight, but something solid, something humanoid. It shifted, a brief silhouette against the faint moonlight, filtering through a crack in the ceiling above. Then it was gone. Paralyzed by terror, I clung to the cold stone railing, the chanting below a relentless drumbeat in my ears. Had I imagined it? Was it a trick of the light? Or was it something far worse, something drawn to the ritual taking place below, something now aware of my presence? I couldn't risk staying. I forced myself to move, each step a monumental effort against the weight of fear pressing down on me. The air grew colder as I ascended, and a strange, cloying scent, like overripe fruit and something metallic, tickled my nostrils. It was the same smell I'd noticed in the chapel, only intensified, almost suffocating. Finally, I reached the top of the stairs. I found myself in a small, circular chamber. The cracked ceiling opened to the night sky. Moonlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. The chamber was bare, except for a single object in the center, a stone altar, stained dark in the moonlight. The chanting from below was fainter here, but the rhythmic thumping continued, a steady pulse in the silence. My gaze was drawn to the altar. A shallow depression, almost like a bowl, had been carved into its surface. It was filled with a dark, viscous liquid, reflecting the moonlight like obsidian. The metallic scent was overwhelming here, making me gag. As I cautiously approached, I noticed something else. Scattered around the altar, almost hidden in the shadows, were bones. Small bones, delicate bones, arranged in intricate patterns. Bird bones, I realized with a shudder. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. I knelt beside the altar, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch the dark liquid. It was cold, almost icy, and surprisingly thick. As my fingertip broke the surface, a ripple spread outwards, and the scent intensified, a wave of nausea washing over me. I pulled my hand back, a single drop clinging to my skin. I brought it to my nose, hesitantly inhaling. The metallic tang was overpowering, but beneath it I detected something else, something familiar, something herbal. My mind raced, trying to place the scent. Lavender, rosemary, and something else, something darker, more sinister. Nightshade. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The chanting, the thumping, the bones, the dark liquid, it was all part of a ritual, a dark, ancient ritual. And the liquid, it wasn't just any liquid, it was a potion made with nightshade, a deadly, poisonous potion. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the altar. I looked up, my heart seizing in my chest. The figure I'd glimpsed on the stairs stood silhouetted against the moonlight, tall and cloaked, its face hidden in shadow. It held something in its hand, something long and thin, glinting in the moonlight. A blade. The figure moved with a chilling grace, stepping into the moonlight. The hood fell back, revealing a face that will forever be etched in my nightmares. Pale skin stretched taut over sharp bones, eyes burning with an unnatural light, lips pulled back in a chilling smile. It was the face of a fanatic, a zealot, a true believer in the dark powers they served. The figure raised the blade, the moonlight catching its edge. The chanting from below reached a crescendo, the rhythmic thumping echoing in the stillness of the night. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was about to become a sacrifice. Another offering to the dark gods, worshipped in the Templars' forbidden chapel. To be continued. I survived a night in the Templars' forbidden chapel, Part 7. The scratching continued, a maddening rhythm against the heavy oak door. It was a sound that burrowed into my mind, a tiny insect gnawing at the edges of sanity. I pressed my ear against the cold stone wall, trying to decipher a pattern, a meaning, anything beyond the primal terror it evoked. Was it animalistic, human, or something else? Dawn was a distant dream, the stained glass window offering only a sliver of pre-dawn gray, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness within the chapel. The air, thick with the scent of mildew and something subtly metallic, clung to me like a shroud. The unsettling silence that had followed the chanting the previous night had been replaced by this incessant scraping, a low, guttural growl occasionally accompanying it. Fear, a cold, clammy hand, gripped my heart. I had to escape. This chapel, once a place of supposed sanctity, had become a prison, a waiting room for something unspeakable. The heavy iron lock on the door seemed to mock me, a symbol of my helplessness. Remembering the hidden alcove I'd discovered earlier, I retreated, my footsteps echoing eerily in the oppressive silence between the scratches. The small space, barely large enough to stand in, offered little comfort, but at least it was out of immediate sight. I ran my hand over the cold, smooth stones, searching for any clue, any mechanism that might offer an escape route. My fingers brushed against something unexpected, a small metallic latch concealed within the mortar. Hope surged through me, fragile but potent. I fumbled with the latch, my fingers trembling. It gave way with a soft click, revealing a narrow passage behind the stones. Hesitantly, I pushed the stone panel inwards. A rush of cold, damp air hit me, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of decay. The opening was small, barely enough to squeeze through, but the scratching at the door intensified, urging me forward. Taking a deep breath, I slipped through the opening, the rough stones scraping against my clothes. The passage was narrow and pitch black, the air heavy with an oppressive stillness. I fumbled for my lighter, the tiny flame a pathetic beacon in the consuming darkness. It revealed a rough-hewn tunnel descending steeply into the earth. The scraping at the door stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. I could feel it, a presence, something lurking just beyond the stone wall, listening, waiting. The air grew colder, a chilling breath against my neck. Driven by primal fear, I started down the tunnel, the uneven ground treacherous underfoot. The air grew thick with the smell of earth and something else, something ancient and unsettling. The tunnel twisted and turned, descending deeper into the earth, the oppressive darkness closing in around me. I walked for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the occasional drip of water. The walls were damp and slick, covered in a strange phosphorescent moss that emitted a faint, eerie glow. The deeper I descended, the stronger the smell of decay became, until it was almost overpowering. Finally, the tunnel opened into a large cavern. The faint light from the moss illuminated the space, revealing a horrifying sight. The cavern was filled with bones, human bones, piled high against the walls, forming macabre mounds of skeletal remains. Skulls stared out from the darkness, empty sockets seeming to follow my every move. In the center of the cavern, a single flickering torch cast long, dancing shadows. Beneath it lay a stone altar, stained dark with what looked like dried blood. A single, leather-bound book rested on the altar, its cover adorned with a strange, intricate symbol, a serpent coiled around a cross. As I approached the altar, I noticed something else. Etched into the stone floor around the altar were a series of symbols, similar to the one on the book. They seemed to radiate outwards, forming a complex, geometric pattern, and within the center of the pattern, something moved. It was small, barely visible in the flickering torchlight. As I drew closer, I could see it more clearly. A rat, its fur matted and dark, gnawed on something lying on the floor. As it moved, the object it was gnawing on rolled over, revealing itself in the dim light. It was a human finger, its bone gleaming white against the dark stone. I stumbled back, nausea rising in my throat. The rat, startled by my movement, scurried away, disappearing into the shadows. My eyes darted around the cavern, my mind racing. What had I stumbled into? What was this place? Suddenly, the torch flickered and died, plunging the cavern into absolute darkness. A low growl echoed from the shadows, followed by the sound of something moving, something large. The smell of decay intensified, suffocating me. Terror gripped me, paralyzing me in the darkness. I could hear it now, the sound of its breathing, slow and ragged, coming closer. Something brushed against my leg, something cold and slimy. I screamed, a primal scream of pure terror, echoing through the cavern. And then, a voice, whispering from the darkness, a voice that chilled me to the bone. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed. "This is a place of death." The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was a pair of glowing red eyes staring at me from the shadows. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 8. The scraping sound returned, louder this time, dragging across the flagstones like nails on a chalkboard. It spiraled closer, echoing from the unseen corners of the chapel. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my back against the cold stone altar, convinced that whatever lurked in the shadows was finally coming for me. The iron tang of blood, already thick in the air, intensified, coating the back of my throat like rust. Then, silence. A silence so profound it was almost a physical presence, pressing down on me, stealing the very air from my lungs. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs, for the inevitable attack. But nothing came. Slowly, painstakingly, I peeled my eyelids open, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows across the chapel's ravaged interior. Empty. Still empty. Except something was different. The air felt charged, a low hum vibrated through the stone floor, tingling in the soles of my feet. And the smell. It was overwhelming now. A coppery stench of decay mixed with something else. Something sickeningly sweet, like overripe fruit. I pushed myself away from the altar, my legs shaky. I had to get out, had to escape this suffocating dread. I stumbled towards the heavy oak door, my hand outstretched. As my fingers brushed against the wood, a voice, barely a whisper, slithered through the air. "Leaving so soon?" I froze. The voice was coming from behind me, from the altar. I didn't dare turn around. "Who's there?" I croaked, my voice a dry rasp. The whispering grew louder, closer, laced with a chilling amusement. "We've been waiting for you." The plural pronoun sent a shiver of ice down my spine. "We?" How many were there? My hand trembled on the door handle. I had to turn around. I had to see what I was dealing with. Taking a deep breath, I slowly pivoted, my gaze sweeping across the altar. The single candle still flickered, casting a dim, unsteady light. But something was there, something I hadn't noticed before. A shape, huddled in the shadows at the base of the altar. It was small, almost childlike, wrapped in what looked like a dark, tattered cloak. Who are you?" I stammered. The figure didn't move. The whispering continued, its source seemingly emanating from the very shadows that enveloped it. "We are the forgotten, the discarded, the ones who dwell in the darkness." My eyes strained to penetrate the gloom. As the candlelight flickered again, I caught a glimpse of something beneath the cloak. A skeletal hand, bone-white and impossibly thin, clutching a small, ornate box. What do you want?" The figure finally stirred, the cloak shifting slightly. "We want what was taken from us," the whisper rasped. "We want the key." The key, the Templar's key, the one Father Michael had warned me about, the one I'd found hidden beneath the altar, the one now tucked safely inside my coat pocket. A cold dread gripped me. They knew I had it. The skeletal hand extended from beneath the cloak, the ornate box held aloft. "Give us the key," the whisper hissed, its tone sharpening, "and you may yet leave this place alive." I hesitated. Could I trust them? Even if I gave them the key, what guarantee did I have that they wouldn't harm me? But the alternative to stay here, trapped in this unholy place with these creatures, was unthinkable. My hand moved towards my pocket, my fingers closing around the cold metal of the key. As I drew it out, the figure in the shadows let out a low, guttural chuckle, a sound that sent shivers of revulsion through me. "Wise choice," the whisper hissed. But as I took a step forward, another voice, deeper, more resonant, echoed through the chapel. "Do not give it to them!" I spun around, searching for the source of the new voice. The chapel was still empty, save for the cloaked figure by the altar. Where was it coming from? "Who said that?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The first whisper hissed again, its tone laced with anger. "Ignore it! It's a trick! Give us the key!" But the second voice persisted, echoing through the stone walls, its tone urgent and pleading. "Don't listen to them! They'll deceive you! The key is not theirs to claim!" I stood frozen, caught between two unseen forces, the key clutched tightly in my hand. Who should I trust? The whispering shadows, or the unseen voice that warned me against them? My mind raced. trying to make sense of the impossible situation. But as the whispering grew more insistent, more menacing, I knew I had to make a choice. And I knew, deep in my gut, that the choice I made would determine my fate. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 9. The chanting swelled, no longer a distant murmur, but a guttural resonance that vibrated through the stone floor and up into my bones. It was a language I didn't understand, yet I understood it perfectly. It spoke of ancient rites, of forgotten gods, of sacrifices made beneath a cold, indifferent moon. My hands, still stained faintly with the dust of centuries, trembled. Fear, cold and clammy, had taken root in my stomach. I was alone, trapped in the heart of this unholy place, with no weapon save the sputtering flashlight clutched in my sweaty hand. The air grew thick, heavy, almost difficult to breathe. The scent of incense, which had been a subtle undercurrent, now choked the air, cloying and sickly sweet. Slowly, cautiously, I backed away from the archway, my eyes never leaving the swirling shadows beyond. The chanting intensified, punctuated by a rhythmic thumping, like a giant, unseen heart beating in time with some unholy ritual. I strained to see through the darkness, my flashlight beam dancing nervously, revealing only fragmented glimpses of what lay within. I saw flashes of movement, dark robes swirling, glints of metal reflecting the unseen light source. Then, a brief, terrifying glimpse of something raised high, a long, curved blade, glinting in the flickering, ethereal light. Terror lent me a burst of adrenaline. I turned and ran, my boots echoing loudly on the flagstones, the chanting pursuing me like a vengeful spirit. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that horrifying spectacle. I stumbled through the maze of corridors, each turn seemingly identical to the last, the stone walls pressing in on me, suffocating me with their age and their secrets. My flashlight beam skittered over faded frescoes, their once vibrant colors now muted by time and decay, depicting scenes of strange rituals and unearthly beings. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, until the chanting faded to a distant drone. Finally, I collapsed against a cold, damp wall, gasping for breath, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the chanting. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water echoing through the unseen chambers. I held my breath, listening, straining for any sound that would indicate I wasn't alone. After what felt like an eternity, I pushed myself away from the wall, my legs shaky and weak. I shone the flashlight around, its beam weak and flickering, barely penetrating the oppressive gloom. I was in a small, circular chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, stacked high with ancient tomes bound in leather and secured with heavy metal clasps. The air in the chamber was thick with the smell of dust and decay. A single shaft of moonlight pierced the gloom through a high, narrow window, illuminating a small wooden table in the center of the room. On the table lay a single book, open to a page filled with strange symbols and cryptic diagrams. Drawn by an unseen force, I approached the table. The book seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the brittle pages. As my fingers brushed against the parchment, the symbols seemed to writhe and shift before my eyes. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and the room began to spin. I stumbled back, clutching my head, a strange buzzing sound filling my ears. The symbols from the book swam before my eyes, burning themselves into my vision. I felt a strange pull, a compulsion to return to the table, to read the words, to understand the secrets contained within the ancient text. Resisting the urge with every ounce of my will, I backed away from the table, my eyes fixed on the book. I knew, instinctively, that to delve further into its mysteries was to invite madness, to surrender myself to the same dark forces that held sway within this unholy place. As I backed away, the moonlight illuminating the table flickered and died, plunging the chamber into darkness. A chilling gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing my flashlight and leaving me in absolute, terrifying blackness. The chanting began again, closer now, more insistent, accompanied by the sickeningly sweet scent of incense and the rhythmic thumping that resonated deep within my soul. I was trapped, alone in the darkness, surrounded by the whispers of ancient evils, with the chilling certainty that whatever lurked in the shadows was coming for me. And I knew, with the dread that chilled me to the bone, that this night in the Templars' forbidden chapel was far from over. I survived a night in the Templars' forbidden chapel, Part 10. The scratching intensified, morphing into a rhythmic thumping like a giant heart beating within the chapel walls. The chanting, too, gained a disturbing cadence, rising and falling with the pulsating stone. Fear, thick and cloying, filled the air like incense, clinging to the back of my throat. I edged closer to the altar, my only source of light the flickering candle. The Templar symbol, once a source of fascination, now seemed to writhe and contort in the dim light, its sharp edges mocking me. I could feel the vibrations through my boots, resonating up my legs, a physical manifestation of the chapel's growing unease. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The only response was the insistent thumping and the low, guttural chanting, which now seemed to be laced with whispers, too faint to decipher. Suddenly the vibrations stopped. The chanting ceased. The silence that descended was deafening, more terrifying than the cacophony that preceded it. I held my breath, every muscle tense, waiting. Then a single drop of something viscous splashed onto my cheek. I flinched, bringing my hand up to wipe it away. It was dark, almost black, and sticky. I brought my hand closer to the candlelight and recoiled. It was blood. More drops fell, splattering the stone floor around me. I craned my neck, searching for the source. The ceiling, once smooth stone, now pulsed with veins of something dark and oily, like corrupted blood vessels. The drops were oozing from these grotesque veins, falling onto the altar, onto the floor, onto me. I scrambled back, knocking over the candle holder. The flames sputtered and died, plunging the chapel into absolute darkness. A scream caught in my throat, choked by terror. The darkness wasn't empty. I could feel it, a presence, heavy and malevolent, pressing in on me. I fumbled for my lighter, my fingers clumsy with fear. The spark ignited, revealing a horrifying tableau. The entire chapel was covered in the pulsating, dark veins. The altar dripped with the black blood, and the Templar symbol now glowed with an eerie internal light. But it wasn't the chapel itself that stole my breath. It was the figure standing before me, tall and skeletal. It was draped in what looked like decaying Templar robes. Its face was obscured by a deep cowl, but 2 points of malevolent red light burned within its depths. Its hands, long and bony, ended in claws that dripped with the same black ichor that oozed from the ceiling. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. The figure raised a clawed hand, pointing a single finger at me. A low, guttural growl emanated from beneath the cowl, a sound that vibrated deep within my bones. "You defile sacred ground," a rasping voice echoed, each word laced with chilling malice. My mind raced. Sacred ground? Was this some guardian of the chapel, awakened by my intrusion, or something far more sinister, something tied to the Templars' forbidden rituals? I had to escape. I scrambled backwards, my hands scraping against the cold stone. The figure glided towards me, impossibly fast, its red eyes burning into me. "The blood demands sacrifice," the rasping voice continued, the growl intensifying. I stumbled over something, a loose stone perhaps, and fell back against the altar. The icy touch of the stone sent a shiver down my spine. The figure loomed over me, its clawed hand reaching out. Suddenly, I remembered the parchment, the cryptic symbols I had glimpsed. Was there a way to appease this thing? Could the knowledge I'd gained save me? With trembling hands, I pulled the parchment from my pocket. It was stained with the black blood, the symbols now glowing with the same eerie light as the Templar symbol on the altar. I held it up towards the figure, a desperate plea in my eyes. The figure paused, its red eyes fixated on the parchment. The growling subsided, replaced by a low, guttural humming. The pulsating veins in the chapel seemed to dim slightly, the dripping blood slowing. "Knowledge protection," the rasping voice whispered. the words barely audible. Was it working? Was the parchment some form of protection? I held my breath, daring to hope. Then the figure's hand shot out, faster than I could react. Its claws ripped through the parchment, tearing it into shreds. The humming stopped, replaced by a chilling shriek that echoed through the chapel. The veins pulsed with renewed intensity, the black blood flowing freely. "No protection, only sacrifice," the rasping voice screeched, its red eyes blazing with fury. The claws reached for me, and the last vestiges of hope vanished. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. This was it, the end. I had survived a night in the Templar's forbidden chapel, only to die at the hands of its terrifying guardian. I survived a night in the Templar's forbidden chapel, Part 11. The chanting stopped. A silence, thicker and more suffocating than any I'd experienced before, descended on the chapel. The single flickering candle I'd managed to relight cast grotesque, dancing shadows on the crumbling walls, turning the faded frescoes of saints into leering demons. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. I gripped the Templar's sword, the cold steel a meager comfort in the face of the unknown. Slowly, a low groan echoed from the altar. It wasn't the moan of a living creature, not quite. It sounded more like stone grinding against stone, the earth itself complaining under some unimaginable pressure. My gaze was riveted to the shrouded figure on the altar. The shroud, once still, now rippled with a subtle movement, as if something were struggling beneath it. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at my throat. I wanted to run, to flee back through the labyrinthine tunnels and never look back. But my feet were rooted to the spot, held captive by a morbid fascination. I had to know. I had to see what lay beneath that shroud. Another groan, louder this time, vibrated through the chapel. Dust rained down from the vaulted ceiling. Cracks, thin and jagged, appeared on the stone floor, spreading outwards from the altar like the roots of some unholy tree. The air grew colder, biting at my exposed skin, and a faint metallic smell, like blood and rust, filled my nostrils. The shroud began to shift more violently. A hand, skeletal and impossibly long, emerged from beneath the folds, its fingers twitching as if searching for purchase. The skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over bone, the nails long and yellowed, like the talons of a bird of prey. Another hand appeared, mirroring the first, and then a head, its face obscured by the shadows of the hood. I swallowed hard, the metallic tang of fear thick in my mouth. The figure sat up slowly, the shroud falling away to reveal nothing. There was no body beneath the hood, just an empty blackness that seemed to absorb the flickering candlelight. It was a void, a gaping hole in the fabric of reality, and staring into it felt like staring into the abyss itself. A voice, raspy and ancient, whispered from the emptiness, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew its meaning. It spoke of ancient rituals, of forgotten gods, of sacrifices made and powers unleashed. It spoke of a darkness that existed before time and would remain long after the last star had faded. The empty hood turned towards me, and I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a chilling certainty that I was looking at something far older, far more powerful than anything I could comprehend. The whispering intensified, becoming a torrent of unintelligible sounds that hammered against my skull, threatening to shatter my sanity. My vision blurred, and the chapel seemed to spin around me. I staggered back, the Templar's sword slipping from my numb fingers and clattering against the stone floor. My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt a strange pressure building inside my chest, like a balloon about to burst. I knew with a terrifying certainty that I was about to die. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chanting started again, low and rhythmic, emanating from the tunnels beyond the chapel. The whispering stopped. The pressure in my chest eased. The empty hood turned away from me, as if distracted by the chanting, and the figure on the altar slumped back down, the shroud settling back over it like a funeral pall. The cracks in the floor remained, a stark reminder of the power that had almost consumed me. The metallic smell lingered in the air, but the oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the monotonous chanting, which strangely now felt almost comforting. It was a disturbing comfort, the kind a prisoner might find in the predictable routine of their confinement, but it was comfort nonetheless. I stumbled forward, picking up the fallen sword. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, but I forced myself to stand tall, to face the altar once more. The figure remained still, shrouded in darkness. The chanting continued, a constant, droning reminder of the unseen presence lurking in the tunnels. I knew I couldn't stay in the chapel. Whatever lay beneath that shroud, whatever power had almost consumed me, it was still there, waiting. But I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet. I needed to understand. I needed to know what I had stumbled into. I needed to know why I had been spared. Taking a deep breath, I approached the altar again, the Templar's sword held before me like a shield. The chanting filled the air, a morbid lullaby that seemed to seep into my very being. I reached out a trembling hand towards the shrouded figure. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 12. The chanting ceased. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, pressing in on me like the cold stone walls. My heart, having hammered against my ribs throughout the ritualistic drone, now thudded slowly, heavily, each beat a mournful echo in the oppressive stillness. I risked a glance at Father Michael. His eyes, usually alight with a gentle fervor, were glazed, distant, staring fixedly at the now empty space where the shadowy figures had stood. He swayed slightly as if about to collapse, then steadied himself with a hand against the altar, his knuckles white. They accepted, he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible. The offering, it was accepted. I didn't understand. Accepted? What offering? My mind reeled, struggling to make sense of the horrifying spectacle I had just witnessed. The shadowy figures, the chanting, the oppressive atmosphere, it all hinted at something ancient, something dark, something far beyond my comprehension. "Father Michael," I began, my voice trembling, "what did you do?" He turned to me then, a flicker of something unsettling in his eyes. Not quite recognition, not quite comprehension, but something else. "It was necessary, Thomas," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "For the greater good." He reached out a hand and placed it on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "Come," he said, his voice regaining a semblance of its usual warmth, though a chilling undercurrent remained. "We must leave this place. It is no longer safe." I allowed him to lead me out of the chapel, the heavy oak door groaning shut behind us, sealing the horrors within. The cool night air was a welcome reprieve from the stifling atmosphere of the chapel, but the unease that had taken root within me refused to dissipate. The walk back to the rectory was shrouded in an unsettling silence. Father Michael seemed lost in his own thoughts, his gaze fixed on the ground ahead. I wanted to ask him, to demand an explanation for what I had witnessed, but the fear that gripped me held me back. I had seen something I wasn't meant to see, something that transcended the realm of the rational, and I instinctively knew that pushing for answers might lead me down a path I wouldn't be able to return from. Back in the rectory, Father Michael immediately retired to his study, leaving me alone in the dimly lit sitting room. I sat by the dying embers of the fire, the shadows dancing on the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that fueled my already heightened paranoia. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling around me, each sound sending a fresh wave of fear through my veins. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadowy figures, heard the chanting, felt the oppressive atmosphere of the chapel closing in around me. I paced the room, my mind racing, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of the night. What offering had Father Michael spoken of? What had they summoned in that forbidden chapel? As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, painting the room in a pale, ethereal light, I decided to confront Father Michael. I found him in his study, sitting at his desk, surrounded by open books, his face etched with exhaustion. He looked up as I entered, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "Thomas," he said, his voice weary, "I trust you slept well?" The question, so mundane in any other circumstance, felt laden with a sinister undertone. "I didn't sleep, Father," I replied, my voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I need answers. What happened in that chapel?" He sighed, rubbing his temples with his fingers. "It is a complicated matter, Thomas," he said, his voice evasive. "Something ancient was awakened tonight, something that has slumbered for centuries." "Awakened? What do you mean?" I pressed. He hesitated, then rose from his desk and walked over to the window, his back to me. "The Knights Templar," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were guardians, protectors of sacred relics, but they also dabbled in darker arts. They sought power, immortality, and they believed they could achieve it through rituals." He turned back to me, his eyes now filled with a strange intensity. "The chapel," he continued, "it was built on a nexus of power, a place where the veil between our world and others is thin. The ritual we performed tonight, it was meant to appease an ancient entity, to gain its favor." "Appease? With what?" I demanded, my voice rising. He looked at me, a flicker of something dark, something primal, flashing in his eyes. "With an offering," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "A sacrifice." My blood ran cold. "Sacrifice?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. What kind of sacrifice?" A slow, chilling smile spread across Father Michael's face. He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip tight, almost painful. "A pure soul, Thomas," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "A soul untainted by sin." He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "Your soul." To be continued. I survived a night in the Templars' Forbidden Chapel, Part 13. The chanting stopped. The silence that followed was thicker, heavier, more oppressive than the chanting itself. I held my breath, ears straining, every nerve ending screaming for some indication of what was coming next. My hand, still gripping the cold, smooth stone of the altar, was slick with sweat. The flickering candlelight, painted grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls, turning the already unsettling frescoes into nightmarish visions. The air grew colder, a palpable chill, a sucking emptiness that seemed to drain the warmth from my very core. I could see my breath puffing out in front of me, forming fleeting clouds in the frigid air. This wasn't the natural chill of a stone chapel in the dead of night. This was something else. Then, a sound, a faint scraping like nails on stone emanating from the darkness beyond the altar. It grew steadily louder, closer, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that vibrated deep within my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen in terror, but my limbs felt like lead. The scraping stopped. The growling continued, now right behind me, so close I could feel the hot, fetid breath on the back of my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the inevitable, but nothing happened. Slowly, cautiously, I opened one eye, then the other. The chapel was empty. The chanting, the scraping, the growling, all gone. Vanished as if they had never been. Only the flickering candlelight and the oppressive silence remained. I was alone again. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was stronger than ever. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. Turning from the altar, I stumbled towards the chapel door, my legs shaking so violently I could barely stand. As I reached for the heavy wooden door, a voice, raspy and ancient, whispered in my ear, "You cannot leave." I spun around, searching the shadows, but saw nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Who's there?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. The voice chuckled, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "You know who I am," it whispered, seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You have seen my mark." The mark, the inverted cross carved into the altar. The symbol I'd seen etched into the stone floor beneath the Templar knight's skeleton. The symbol that haunted my nightmares. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced me like a shard of ice. I knew what the voice meant. I knew what I had stumbled upon in this forsaken chapel. This wasn't just a holy place corrupted by some unknown evil. This was something far older, far more sinister. "What do you want?" I managed to stammer, my voice trembling. "You," the voice hissed, closer now, right behind me again. "You are the key." I whirled around, ready to face whatever horror awaited me, but again, nothing. The chapel was empty. The voice was gone. but the dread remained, a suffocating weight pressing down on me. I didn't understand. A key? A key to what? And how could I be a key? I was just a historian, a researcher, caught in something far beyond my comprehension. Suddenly, the candles lining the walls began to flicker more violently, their flames growing taller, stretching towards the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like tormented spirits. The air crackled with an unseen energy. The stone floor beneath my feet vibrated. The chapel felt as if it were about to tear itself apart. Then, from the darkness beyond the altar, a figure emerged. Tall and cloaked, its face hidden in shadow, it moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the stone floor as if floating. It stopped before me, the air around it shimmering with an unseen power. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only stare, frozen in terror, as the figure slowly raised its hand. The shadow shifted, revealing a glimpse of its face, pale, gaunt, with eyes that burned with an unholy light. A skeletal hand, its bones blackened and withered, reached out towards me. "Come," the voice whispered, the same raspy, ancient voice that had spoken to me before. "Embrace your destiny." The hand reached closer, its bony fingers inches from my face. I wanted to scream, to fight, to flee, but I was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of an unseen force. The skeletal fingers brushed against my cheek, cold as death, sending a shiver down my spine. The candles erupted in a blinding flash of light. The chapel spun. The floor beneath me gave way. I fell into darkness. The last thing I heard was the voice, whispering in my ear, "Welcome home." I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 14. The chanting resumed, softer this time, a sibilant whisper that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. It wrapped around me, a chilling caress that made my skin crawl. The spectral knights remained motionless, their empty helms fixed on the altar. Fear, cold and viscous, clogged my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, my will paralyzed by the oppressive atmosphere. Slowly, cautiously, I edged towards the altar, the only source of light in the suffocating darkness. As I drew closer, I saw that the crimson stain wasn't just a stain. It was a pool, shallow but viscous, shimmering in the candlelight. The metallic tang of blood, thick and cloying, filled the air. My stomach heaved. I knelt beside the pool, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch the surface. It was warm, almost hot, pulsating with a faint, sickening rhythm. I recoiled, wiping my hand on my trousers, the sticky residue clinging stubbornly to my skin. That's when I noticed the inscription etched into the altar's surface. It was in Latin, the same archaic script I'd seen on the chapel's entrance. My Latin was rusty, a relic of my school days, but I could make out a few words. Sanguis vita aeternum, blood, life eternal. A wave of nausea washed over me. The chanting intensified, the whispers becoming a guttural drone that vibrated in my chest. The spectral knights shifted, their swords scraping against the stone floor, the sound echoing through the chapel like the rasp of a scythe against bone. I scrambled back, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I had to get out of there. I had to escape. I turned to flee, but a figure blocked my path. It was taller than the knights, robed in black, its face hidden by a deep cowl. A single skeletal hand, bone-white and impossibly long, emerged from the folds of its robe, pointing towards the altar. Terror choked me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. My mind screamed, a silent, desperate plea for help, for escape, for anything to break the suffocating grip of fear. The robed figure glided towards the altar, its movements unnervingly smooth, almost ethereal. It stopped before the pool of blood, the skeletal hand dipping into the crimson liquid. The chanting reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that reverberated through the chapel, shaking the very foundations of the building. The robed figure raised its hand, the blood dripping from its bony fingers, and began to trace symbols in the air. The symbols glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light, pulsating and shifting like living things. As the figure completed the last symbol, the air crackled with an unseen energy. The temperature plummeted, and a wind, icy and foul, swept through the chapel, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into absolute darkness. Blind terror consumed me. I stumbled back, colliding with something cold and hard. One of the spectral knights, its icy armor sent a shiver down my spine. I pushed past it, my hands outstretched, desperately searching for a way out, for anything to cling to in the suffocating blackness. A low growl echoed from the altar, followed by a sickening crunch. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by an unnerving silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. I could feel the presence of the robed figure, a palpable weight in the darkness, a suffocating aura of malevolence. Then a voice, deep and resonant, filled the chapel, speaking in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew its meaning. It was a promise. A threat, a prophecy of doom. My legs gave way, and I collapsed onto the cold stone floor, my mind reeling, my senses overwhelmed. I lay there, paralyzed by fear, waiting for the inevitable. A cold hand grasped my arm, its touch like ice against my skin. I flinched, a strangled sob escaping my lips. The hand tightened its grip, pulling me to my feet. I was dragged forward, stumbling blindly through the darkness. I could hear the rasping breaths of the robed figure behind me, its presence a constant, suffocating weight. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was being led to my doom. The icy hand released me, and I stumbled forward, my hands outstretched, trying to orient myself in the darkness. My fingers brushed against something smooth and cold. A wall. I traced the wall with my fingertips, searching for a door, a window, anything that offered a glimmer of hope. Then I felt it. A crack in the wall, barely perceptible but enough to give me a sliver of hope. I pushed against the crack, my fingers scraping against the rough stone. It widened, slowly, agonizingly slowly, revealing a sliver of light. I squeezed through the opening, collapsing onto the cold earth outside, gasping for breath, the night air stinging my lungs. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and the horrors within the chapel. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I ran until my lungs burned, and my legs ached, driven by a primal fear I had never known before. I ran until the chapel was nothing more than a distant silhouette against the moonlit sky. I ran until I collapsed, exhausted and trembling, on the edge of the woods. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, I finally allowed myself to look back. The chapel stood silent and ominous, a dark shadow against the rising sun. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the horrors within were still waiting, lurking in the shadows, biding their time. And I knew, with an equally chilling certainty, that I would never be truly free of them. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 15. The chanting swelled, resonating not just in the chapel but within my very bones. The air grew thick, heavy with the stench of mildew and something else, something acrid, metallic, like blood left to congeal in the sun. The shadows danced with renewed vigor, twisting into grotesque parodies of human forms. I clung to the altar, my knuckles white, my breath catching in ragged gasps. The spectral knight remained motionless, its visor fixed on me, an accusatory silence more terrifying than any scream. I tried to pray, but the words withered on my tongue, choked by the rising terror. The floor beneath me vibrated with the rhythmic chanting, and a fine dust, like powdered bone, sifted down from the ceiling. I realized with a sickening lurch that the vibrations weren't just from the chanting. The ground itself was moving. Slowly, agonizingly, the altar began to descend. Panic clawed at my throat. I scrambled back, trying to find purchase on the shifting stone, but there was nowhere to go. The altar was sinking, carrying me down into the darkness beneath the chapel. The chanting intensified, morphing into a dissonant, ululating wail that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. The altar finally came to rest with a jarring thud. The air down here was colder, damper, heavy with the scent of decay. I fumbled for my lighter, the small flame a pathetic beacon in the oppressive gloom. The altar had descended into a circular chamber, the walls lined with shelves stacked with skulls, hundreds of them, their empty sockets staring blindly in the flickering light. Some were human, others not. Their shapes were distorted, elongated, with horns or extra eye sockets. A chill, deeper than the cold air, seeped into my soul. The chanting stopped abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I strained my ears, listening for any sound, any clue as to what awaited me. A slow, deliberate drip echoed through the chamber. Water? Blood? I couldn't tell. Then a new sound emerged. A soft scraping, like nails on stone, growing closer. I swiveled around, my lighter held high, desperately trying to pierce the shadows. Something moved in the darkness beyond the pool of light. Something large. Something breathing. The scraping stopped. The silence stretched, taut with anticipation. Then, a pair of eyes, glowing with an unearthly green light, materialized in the darkness. They weren't human eyes. They were large, reptilian, filled with ancient malice. A low growl rumbled through the chamber, vibrating in my chest. The creature took a step forward, its form slowly resolving itself in the flickering light. It was humanoid, but twisted and grotesque. Its skin was a sickly gray stretched tight over bone. Long, skeletal fingers tipped with razor-sharp claws twitched at its sides. Its head was elongated, with a pronounced snout and those terrifying green eyes. A single, spiraling horn protruded from its forehead. It was a creature of nightmare, something not meant to exist in this world. The creature stalked towards me, its movements slow and deliberate, savoring my terror. I backed away until I felt the cold stone of the chamber wall against my back. There was nowhere left to run. What are you?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. The creature tilted its head, as if considering my question. Then, a voice, raspy and ancient, echoed through the chamber. "We are the guardians," it hissed, "the keepers of the secrets. And you are the trespasser." The creature lunged. I screamed, raising my arms to shield myself, bracing for the inevitable, but the attack never came. A blinding flash of light erupted from the altar, momentarily banishing the darkness. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. In its place stood the spectral knight, its sword drawn, pointing directly at me. The knight advanced, its eyes burning with an icy fire. I cowered against the wall, my mind reeling. Was this another hallucination? Another tormentor sent to break me? Or was this a rescue? The knight stopped inches from me, its spectral form radiating an unnatural cold. It lowered its sword, the tip resting against my chest, just above my heart. Then, in a voice that echoed the ancient chanting, it spoke. "The trial has begun," it said. The floor began to vibrate again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the walls, spreading like spider webs across the stone. The skulls on the shelves rattled, their hollow sockets seeming to fix on me with renewed intensity. The chamber was collapsing. The spectral knight raised its sword, the blade shimmering in the flickering light. "Choose," it commanded, its voice resonating with power. "Join us, or perish with the secrets." The last thing I saw, before the darkness consumed me, was the glint of the spectral sword, descending towards my heart. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 16. The chanting intensified, vibrating through the very stone beneath my feet. The glyphs on the floor, bathed in the sickly green light, pulsed with an unsettling life of their own, mirroring the rhythm of the unseen choir. My fear, a constant companion throughout this ordeal, sharpened into a blade of pure terror. It was a primal fear, a premonition of something ancient and unholy stirring in the depths of the chapel. Cautiously, I crept forward, my steps muffled by the thick carpet of dust. The chanting seemed to emanate from the altar area, shrouded now in a swirling mist that hadn't been there before. The mist glowed with the same eerie, green luminescence, obscuring the details within. The air grew heavy, thick with a metallic tang that stung my nostrils and coated my tongue with a foul taste. As I neared the altar, a figure began to coalesce within the mist. It was tall and gaunt, clad in what appeared to be tattered Templar robes, its face hidden within the depths of a cowl. It stood motionless, its arms outstretched as if in supplication or offering. My blood ran cold. Was this the source of the chanting? Was this the guardian of the forbidden knowledge the chapel held? Then a low growl vibrated through the air, deep and resonant, shaking the very foundations of the chapel. It wasn't coming from the robed figure. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, only to find myself facing nothing. The vast, echoing space of the chapel stretched out before me, bathed in the unsettling green light. The dust motes danced in the air, undisturbed by any presence. Had I imagined it? Was the oppressive atmosphere playing tricks on my mind? The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the scraping sound of stone on stone. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I turned back to the altar. The robed figure was still there, motionless, its form barely discernible within the glowing mist. But something had changed. Something in the air had shifted, become heavier, more charged. And then I saw it. At the foot of the altar, partially obscured by the swirling mist, lay a shape. It was humanoid, but twisted and contorted into an unnatural position. Its limbs were elongated, its fingers and toes impossibly long, ending in wickedly sharp claws. Its head lolled, at an unnatural angle, revealing a face that was both human and monstrously other. The skin was stretched taut over bone, the eyes wide and blank, reflecting the green light with a chilling emptiness. The growl came again, this time from directly beside me, so close I could feel the hot breath on my ear. I flinched, bracing myself for the attack, but nothing came. Slowly, I turned my head, my neck stiff with terror. And then I screamed. Standing beside me, barely a foot away, was another of the creatures. It was identical to the one at the altar, its grotesque form a mockery of human anatomy. Its blank eyes stared into mine, and a low, guttural growl rumbled in its chest. Its breath stank of decay and something else, something ancient and indescribably foul. The chanting intensified, reaching a fever pitch. The glyphs on the floor pulsed with a blinding green light. The robed figure at the altar slowly raised its head, and for the first time I saw its face. Or what was left of it. The skin was drawn tight, revealing the skull beneath. Empty sockets stared out from the depths of the cowl, filled with the same unsettling green light that permeated the chapel. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. The creatures flanking me and the one at the altar moved simultaneously. They lunged forward, their claws outstretched, their growls echoing through the chapel. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose stone and falling heavily to the dusty floor. The creatures closed in, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the pulsating green light. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. This was it. This was the end. I had survived the night in the Templars' forbidden chapel, only to be torn apart by these things. But the attack never came. Instead, I heard a different sound, a high-pitched whine, like metal scraping against metal. It was followed by a series of clicks and whirs, mechanical and precise. I opened my eyes, my vision blurred with tears and terror. The creatures had frozen. They stood motionless, their claws inches from my face, their blank eyes staring into mine. The chanting had stopped. The glyphs on the floor had ceased their pulsing. The green light had faded, replaced by a dim, flickering glow emanating from the altar. Where the robed figure had stood, there was now a machine. I survived a night in the Templars' forbidden chapel, Part 17. The chanting grew closer, weaving around the pillars, slithering through the cracks in the ancient stones. The Latin words, distorted and guttural, were starting to make a horrific kind of sense. They spoke of sacrifice, of cleansing, of a coming darkness. My blood ran cold. The torch in my shaking hand cast grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to mimic the unseen movements beyond the veil of darkness. I pressed myself further back into the alcove, the rough stones scraping against my back. The small, leather-bound book, the one I'd pried from the skeletal hand, felt like a burning coal against my chest. I clutched it tighter, as though it were a shield against the encroaching evil. It was then, in the flickering torchlight, that I noticed something new on the cover. A faint, almost imperceptible etching had appeared, a symbol I didn't recognize. It resembled a coiled serpent devouring its own tail, an Ouroboros, but with unsettlingly sharp angles and what looked like small, clawed feet. The chanting stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was far more terrifying. It was the silence of a predator poised to strike, a silence that screamed with anticipation. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound above the frantic pounding of my heart. A drop of water echoed from the depths of the chapel, each reverberation a hammer blow against my sanity. Then, a slow, deliberate scraping sound began, closer now, emanating from just beyond the archway. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the stone floor. My mind conjured images of iron shackles, of weighted chains, of... A face emerged from the darkness. It wasn't human, not entirely. The skin was stretched taut over bone, almost translucent, revealing the pulsing veins and tendons beneath. Its eyes were vast, black pits, reflecting the flickering torchlight like pools of stagnant oil. A grotesque parody of a human nose was flattened against its skull and its mouth. Its mouth was a gaping maw, filled with needle-sharp teeth, some impossibly long, others broken and jagged. A low growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that vibrated deep within my chest. It took a step into the flickering light, its body slowly revealing itself. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and distorted, its hands tipped with long, curved claws. It wore tattered remnants of what might once have been a Templar's robe, now stained dark and clinging to its skeletal frame. But it was the symbol etched on its forehead that truly chilled me to the bone. It was the same symbol I'd seen moments before on the book, the serpent devouring its own tail. The creature, the asterisk thing, took another step, its black eyes fixed on me. It raised a clawed hand, and I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Instead, a voice, rasping and ancient, whispered from the darkness, "The key! You hold the key!" I opened my eyes. The creature was still there, looming over me, but its movements were hesitant, almost curious. Its gaze was fixed on the book clutched in my hand. "The key?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "The key to the gate," the creature rasped, its voice sending shivers down my spine. "The gate between worlds." My mind reeled. This thing was talking about the strange symbols I'd seen etched throughout the chapel. The symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The symbols that had led me here, to this forbidden place. I don't understand," I stammered. The creature tilted its head, its black eyes boring into me. "The book, open it," it hissed. "Unlock the gate." My hand trembled as I looked down at the leather-bound book. I knew I shouldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to throw it away, to run, to escape this nightmare. But something held me back. A morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand. And perhaps a flicker of hope that within its pages lay the answer to escaping this hellish place. Slowly, cautiously, I began to unclasp the book. The leather creaked, dry and brittle. The pages were yellowed and fragile, covered in strange script and even stranger illustrations. As I turned the first page, a gust of icy wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing my torch, plunging me into utter darkness. The chanting began again, louder this time, closer, interwoven with the creature's rasping whispers. "Open it! Unlock the gate! Release us!" My fingers fumbled with the pages, my heart pounding against my ribs. I couldn't see, but I could feel the strange symbols etched on the parchment, pulsing beneath my fingertips. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and a strange metallic taste filled my mouth. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I was about to make a terrible mistake. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 18. The silence that followed Father Michael's chilling pronouncement was thicker than the chapel's ancient dust. It pressed against my eardrums, amplifying the frantic thudding of my own heart. The chanting had stopped. The oppressive, swirling darkness in the apse had retreated, leaving behind a cold, empty space. Even the unsettling scent of decay seemed to have lessened, replaced by a strange, sterile emptiness. The unbroken chain? I whispered, my voice cracking. The words felt foreign and heavy on my tongue. Father Michael didn't respond immediately. He remained kneeling, his head bowed, as if communicating with something unseen. The flickering candlelight cast his face in a skeletal relief, his eyes lost in shadow. The stillness stretched on, each second a grain of sand added to an unbearable weight. Finally, he slowly lifted his head, and his eyes, when they met mine, were filled with an unsettling mix of fear and resignation. "The unbroken chain binds us all," he said, his voice hollow, devoid of its earlier fervor, "from the first Templar to the last. A chain forged in blood and sacrifice, ensuring the entity's slumber." "Entity?" I echoed, the word catching in my throat. The whispers in the chapel, the chilling chanting, the suffocating darkness, it all pointed to something beyond human comprehension, something ancient and malevolent. "It cannot be named," Father Michael said, shaking his head. "To speak its true name is to invite its gaze, and its gaze extinguishes." He rose slowly, his movements stiff and unnatural. He seemed to have aged decades in the past few minutes. The fire in his eyes had been replaced by a dull ember of despair. "The Templars dedicated their lives, their very souls, to keeping it contained," he continued, walking towards the altar. He ran a trembling hand across the cold stone. "The rituals, the sacrifices, they were all part of the chain. A continuous effort, spanning centuries to keep the gate locked." "But the chanting, it sounded like worship," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Father Michael let out a dry, rasping laugh. "Worship? No. Supplication, a plea for continued imprisonment, a bargain struck in the shadows." He turned to me, his eyes boring into mine. "The chain is weakening. The rituals have been interrupted, forgotten, and now—" His voice trailed off, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the chapel. "And now what?" I pressed, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. He pointed towards the now empty apse. "It stirs." A wave of icy terror washed over me. I could feel it now, a palpable shift in the air, a sense of something vast and unknowable, lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The chapel, which had felt suffocating before, now felt unbearably exposed, as if we were standing on a precipice overlooking an abyss. "We need to leave," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to get out of here." Father Michael shook his head. "There is nowhere to go. The chain binds us to this place. Our fate, and perhaps the fate of all mankind, is tied to this chapel." He walked towards the altar and retrieved a small, leather-bound book. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the script written in a language I didn't recognize. He flipped through the pages, his lips moving silently as he read. "There may be a way," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "a ritual of reinforcement. A way to strengthen the chain." "But the sacrifices," I started, remembering the gruesome depictions on the walls, the chilling stories of the Templars, dark practices. Father Michael closed the book with a snap, his face grim. "The chain demands balance. It requires payment." He looked at me, his gaze unwavering. "A life for a life." The meaning of his words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't talking about some abstract sacrifice. He was talking about a human life. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "Who?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of desperation and something else. Something that made my blood run cold. Something that told me I already knew the answer. The silence in the chapel deepened, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. The flickering candlelight danced across the walls, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. I looked at Father Michael, at the strange glint in his eye, at the leather-bound book clutched tightly in his hand, and a chilling realization washed over me. I wasn't just trapped in the Templars' forbidden chapel. I was the sacrifice. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 19. The chanting grew louder, closer. It vibrated through the stone floor, up my legs, and settled in the pit of my stomach, a cold, writhing knot. The single flickering candle I'd managed to salvage from the sacristy cast grotesque dancing shadows on the chapel walls, transforming the faded frescoes of saints into leering demons. My fingers, numb with cold and fear, traced the outline of the Templar cross etched into the heavy oak door. Escape seemed impossible. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to discern the words of the chant. It was Latin, distorted and guttural, as if dragged from the throats of the long dead. A rhythmic thumping accompanied the chanting, a slow, heavy beat that seemed to synchronize with the pounding of my own heart. I imagined them out there, in the darkness beyond the door, the robed figures I'd glimpsed earlier, their faces obscured by shadows, their movements unnervingly fluid. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. The rhythmic thumping continued, however, slower now, more deliberate. It sounded like footsteps, approaching. I stumbled back from the door, my breath catching in my throat. The single candle sputtered, threatening to plunge the chapel into complete darkness. I frantically shielded it with my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A low, guttural chuckle echoed through the wood. It was a sound devoid of any human warmth, a sound that spoke of ancient malice and unimaginable cruelty. Then a voice, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "We know you're in there." My blood ran cold. I knew, with chilling certainty, that they knew. They had known all along. This whole time, I'd been playing a game I couldn't win. The whispering ceased. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear, waiting for the inevitable. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. The silence was a tangible thing, pressing down on me, suffocating me. Then, a scratching sound, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from the other side of the chapel, from the area behind the altar. I slowly turned, my eyes straining to penetrate the gloom. The scratching intensified. It sounded like fingernails, scraping against stone. I took a hesitant step towards the altar, the flickering candle casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed around me. The scratching stopped. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Then a low groan echoed from behind the altar. It was a sound of unimaginable suffering, a sound that ripped through the silence like a jagged blade. My hand trembled as I raised the candle higher, its feeble light barely illuminating the space behind the altar. What I saw made my blood run cold. A figure, hunched and contorted, was pressed against the wall behind the altar. It was shrouded in darkness, its features obscured by shadow, but I could see the glint of something metallic. Chains, perhaps, binding its wrists to the stone. The groaning continued, low and guttural, each sound a testament to unimaginable agony. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I began to make out more details. The figure was clad in what looked like ancient, decaying robes. Its head was bowed, its long, matted hair obscuring its face. But then, with a sudden jerky movement, the figure raised its head. The candlelight flickered across its face, revealing a visage of unimaginable horror. The skin was stretched taut across the skull, the eyes sunken and hollow, the lips drawn back in a silent scream. It was a face, etched with centuries of suffering, a face that had stared into the abyss and seen the horrors that lurked within. And then it spoke. Its voice was a rasping whisper, barely audible above the pounding of my own heart. "Help me." I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure continued to stare at me, its hollow eyes burning into my soul. "Help me," it whispered again, its voice laced with desperation. My mind reeled. Was this some kind of trap? Another trick designed to lure me deeper into their web of madness? Or was this creature a prisoner, just like me? The figure let out another agonizing groan, its body convulsing against the wall, the chains binding its wrists rattled, the sound echoing through the silent chapel. "Please," it whispered, its voice barely a breath. Help me. I stood frozen, torn between my fear and a strange, unsettling sense of pity. What should I do? Could I trust this creature, or was I walking into another trap? The chanting started again, louder this time, closer. The rhythmic thumping of the footsteps returned, echoing through the chapel, drawing nearer. They were coming back. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it fast. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, Part 20. The chanting grew louder, vibrating the very stones beneath my feet. I pressed myself further into the alcove, the rough stones scraping against my skin, a physical discomfort that was almost welcome amidst the creeping dread. The flickering torchlight, now emanating from the open chapel doors, danced across the corridor, casting grotesque, shifting shadows that seemed to writhe and reach for me. I could hear the rhythmic thud of something heavy, like a drum or a heartbeat, amplified 1,000-fold, pounding in time with the chant. Peeking cautiously around the corner, I saw them, a circle of robed figures, their faces obscured by deep cowls, surrounded a stone altar in the center of the chapel. The source of the rhythmic thudding became horrifyingly clear. Strapped to the altar, pale and seemingly lifeless, was Father Michael. His chest rose and fell with unnatural, exaggerated movements, each breath a shuddering gasp. The chanting intensified, becoming a guttural, almost inhuman drone. One of the robed figures stepped forward, raising a wickedly curved dagger that glinted in the torchlight. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but witness the unfolding horror, but I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a morbid fascination. Just as the dagger was about to descend, a different sound cut through the chanting, a high-pitched, keening wail that seemed to come from the very walls of the chapel. The robed figures froze, their heads snapping up in unison. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by an unnerving silence, broken only by Father Michael's ragged breathing and the lingering echo of the wail. A gust of wind, seemingly from nowhere, swept through the chapel, extinguishing the torches and plunging the room into darkness. A collective gasp rose from the robed figures, followed by a flurry of panicked whispers. I fumbled for my lighter, the small flame a pathetic defense against the encroaching darkness. It illuminated only a small circle around me, leaving the rest of the corridor shrouded in impenetrable black. Then I saw it. A shimmering, translucent figure emerged from the darkness at the end of the corridor, floating towards me. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but its edges were blurred, constantly shifting and swirling like smoke. Within its hazy form, I could make out what looked like faces, contorted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. The robed figures in the chapel were silent now, their fear palpable even in the darkness. The spectral figure continued to drift closer, the wailing sound growing louder, more piercing. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a chilling premonition that this entity was far more ancient, far more powerful than anything I had encountered before. The figure stopped just a few feet away, its hazy form pulsing with an eerie light. I could feel its presence, a cold, oppressive weight that seemed to crush the air from my lungs. The faces within the figure became clearer, their features twisted in expressions of unimaginable suffering. They seemed to be reaching out to me, their silent screams echoing in my mind. I wanted to run, to hide, but I was frozen, trapped by the spectral figure's gaze. It felt as though it was peering into my very soul, stripping away my defenses, exposing my deepest fears. Suddenly, one of the robed figures in the chapel screamed, a high-pitched, terrified shriek that echoed through the darkness. Then another, and another. The screams were followed by the sounds of scrambling footsteps and the clatter of something metallic hitting the stone floor. The spectral figure turned towards the chapel, its hazy form flowing like liquid. The wailing intensified, morphing into a chorus of screams that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. I didn't wait to see what happened next. Turning, I fled back down the corridor, my lighter casting flickering shadows that danced and writhed around me. The screams from the chapel followed me, growing fainter as I ran, but their echo resonated in my mind, a chilling reminder of the horrors I had witnessed. I stumbled through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath ragged in my throat. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. to escape the nightmare that had consumed the Templars' forbidden chapel. The spectral figure, the robed figures, Father Michael strapped to the altar. These images were burned into my memory, a horrifying tableau that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. As I ran, a new fear began to take root. The spectral figure, it had felt ancient, powerful, and utterly malevolent, and it had been disturbed. What would it do now that it was free? And would I be able to survive another night in this cursed place? I survived a night in the Templars' forbidden chapel, Part 21. The chanting stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. The oppressive darkness, briefly punctuated by the unholy glow, now felt absolute, suffocating. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I held my breath, straining to hear anything over the roaring in my ears. The only sound was the soft, wet drip of something viscous from the altar. I desperately hoped it wasn't what I thought it was. The floor beneath me vibrated subtly, a low hum that resonated in my bones. It felt wrong, like the earth itself was holding its breath, anticipating something terrible. I clutched the Templar's journal, its worn leather, a small comfort in the engulfing fear. The last passage I'd read before the chanting began spoke of a vessel and a transference. My stomach churned. Slowly, painstakingly slowly, a faint light began to emanate from the altar again. It wasn't the sickly green of before, but a cold, ethereal blue. It pulsed rhythmically, growing stronger, illuminating the space around it. I could finally see the altar clearly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Lying on the altar, bathed in the unearthly blue light, was a human form. It was small, almost childlike. But the unnatural stillness, the grayish pallor of the skin, told me it wasn't sleeping. It was empty, a shell, a vessel. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen presence. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath misting in the air. A low, guttural growl resonated from the shadows behind the altar, something vast and malevolent stirring. I pressed myself against the cold stone wall, wishing I could melt into it, disappear. The blue light intensified, focusing on the figure on the altar. The humming beneath the floor grew stronger, the vibrations now shaking the very foundations of the chapel. Dust and debris rained down from the vaulted ceiling, cracks spiderwebbed across the stone walls, spreading like a malignant disease. Then, a voice, not the chanting from before. This was a singular voice, ancient and powerful, echoing with an authority that made my soul tremble. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, but its meaning was undeniably clear. Power, domination, desecration. The growl behind the altar intensified into a roar that shook the very air. The blue light pulsed frantically, bathing the chapel in its cold radiance. The figure on the altar twitched. Its eyelids flickered open, revealing empty, black sockets. A chilling, silent scream tore through my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, burying my face in the Templar's journal, desperate to block out the horror unfolding before me. The journal, however, seemed to thrum with an unnatural energy, almost vibrating in my hands. I opened it, my eyes scanning the faded script, desperate for some clue, some explanation. The last entry, the one I hadn't fully grasped before, now seemed to burn itself into my consciousness. The vessel is prepared. The gate will open. May God have mercy on our souls. Suddenly the journal felt searing hot against my skin. I dropped it as if it were burning coal. It landed open on the floor, the pages illuminated by the pulsating blue light. The ink on the last entry began to glow, the words shifting and swirling, forming new symbols, an arcane script I'd never seen before. The voice rose in a crescendo of power, the roar behind the altar deafening. The ground beneath me heaved. I scrambled back, away from the altar, away from the unfolding nightmare. The cracks in the walls widened, revealing glimpses of darkness beyond, a darkness that seemed to writhe and pulse with an unholy life. The blue light exploded outwards, engulfing the chapel in a blinding flash. I cried out, shielding my eyes, but it was too late. The light seared itself into my vision, leaving after images that danced and pulsed in the darkness. When I could see again, the blue light was gone. The altar was empty. The humming had stopped. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own heart. But the air was different, heavier, charged with a palpable sense of dread. And from the shadows behind the altar, where the unseen presence had lurked, came a new sound, a slow, deliberate footstep. Then, another. And another. Something was coming, and it was coming for me. The Templar's journal lay open on the floor, the glowing script now forming a single word, a word that chilled me to the bone. Liberatus. Freed. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, part 22 of 25. The chanting swelled, resonating through the very bones of the chapel, vibrating the dust motes dancing in the flickering torchlight. I pressed myself harder against the cold stone wall, the rough texture scraping my skin, a meager comfort against the terror that clawed at my throat. The spectral figures, their forms solidifying with each guttural syllable, were no longer distant phantoms. They were coalescing, becoming tangible, their hollow eyes burning with an unholy light. The lead figure, taller and more imposing than the rest, extended a skeletal hand towards the altar. The air crackled with unseen energy, and the chalice, bathed in the unnatural glow, began to tremble. A thin, viscous liquid, the color of dried blood, oozed from its rim, filling the bowl with a sickeningly sweet smell. Terror lent me a strange clarity. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that whatever ritual was unfolding before me was not meant for mortal eyes. And if those spectral Templars completed it, something truly dreadful would be unleashed upon the world. I had to stop them. My mind raced, searching for a weapon, a way out, anything. My gaze fell upon the shattered remnants of the stained glass window I'd crashed through. Among the shards of colored glass, something glinted. A piece of the lead framework, jagged and sharp. It wasn't much, but it was something. As I crawled towards the window, my hand closed around the lead shard. It cut into my palm, the sting a welcome distraction from the mounting dread. I glanced back. The spectral Templars were now clustered around the altar, their chanting reaching a fever pitch. The lead figure raised the chalice, its contents swirling like a miniature maelstrom. I knew I only had one chance. With a silent prayer, I lunged forward, the lead shard held high. I aimed for the chalice, hoping to knock it from the specter's grasp, to disrupt the ritual, to do something. But as I reached the altar, an invisible force slammed into me, throwing me back against the wall with bone-jarring force. The air shimmered, and the chanting intensified, becoming a physical pressure against my eardrums. I felt a cold hand grip my throat, squeezing the air from my lungs. I looked up into the hollow eyes of the lead Templar. Its skeletal face was inches from mine, its breath a chilling whisper against my cheek. The grip tightened, and darkness began to creep into the edges of my vision. Then, a voice, faint but clear, cut through the chanting. Elias. The spectral Templar faltered, its grip loosening slightly. I gasped for breath, my vision clearing just enough to see a figure standing at the entrance of the chapel. It was Father Michael, his face pale, his eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and determination. He held a small, silver crucifix in his trembling hand, the metal glinting in the flickering torchlight. He stepped forward, his voice gaining strength. Elias, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I command you to cease this unholy ritual. The chanting faltered again, the spectral Templars turning towards Father Michael, their hollow eyes burning with an even more intense light. The lead Templar, still holding me in its grip, snarled, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. Father Michael didn't flinch. He raised the crucifix higher, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Elias, you were once a brother of the Order. You swore an oath to protect the sanctity of this place. Remember your vows, release this innocent soul, and return to the dust from whence you came. The air crackled with unseen energy. The spectral Templars writhed as if in agony, their forms flickering and distorting. The lead Templar's grip tightened on my throat one last time, its hollow eyes burning into mine with a mixture of rage and something else. Sadness? Regret? Then, with a final agonizing shriek, it released me, staggering back as its form began to dissolve into shimmering motes of light. The other spectral figures followed suit, their cries echoing through the chapel as they faded into nothingness. The chanting ceased, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, my body trembling. Father Michael rushed to my side, his hand gently resting on my shoulder. He helped me to sit up, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right, my son?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I could only nod, still too shaken to speak. He looked around the chapel, his gaze lingering on the altar where the chalice still sat, filled with its viscous, blood-red liquid. The air still hung heavy with the remnants of the unholy ritual, a chilling reminder of the darkness that had almost consumed us both. "We must destroy this," he said, his voice firm. He picked up the chalice with a trembling hand, his face grim. "And then," he added, his gaze meeting mine, "we must pray." The flickering torchlight cast long, dancing shadows on the chapel walls, making the silence feel even more profound, more pregnant with unspoken horrors. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the night was far from over. Something still lingered in the air, something dark and malevolent, waiting for its chance to return. I survived a night in the Templars' Forbidden Chapel, part 23 of 25. The chanting grew louder, resonating in my bones, a physical vibration more than a sound. The air crackled, thick with a power that tasted of ozone and ancient dust. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. Father Michael's eyes, blazing with a terrifying light, remained fixed on the altar, where the chalice now pulsed with a sickly, internal luminescence. The sigils carved into its surface seemed to shift and writhe. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever was happening was reaching its climax. The oppressive weight in the air, the relentless chanting, the pulsating chalice, it was all converging towards some unspeakable event. I glanced at Thomas, his face a mask of terror, reflecting my own. We were trapped, caught in the undertow of a ritual centuries old, a ritual we didn't understand, couldn't control, and desperately needed to escape. Suddenly, Father Michael raised his hands above the chalice. The chanting reached a fever pitch. The air vibrated with such intensity that dust swirled around us in a dizzying vortex. The sigils on the chalice blazed with a blinding white light. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the light burned through my eyelids, searing itself onto my retinas. Then, silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, that it felt like the very fabric of reality had unraveled. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. The light had subsided. The chanting had stopped. The chapel was bathed in an eerie, unnatural stillness. Father Michael stood frozen, his arms still outstretched, his face a rictus of something. It wasn't joy, nor triumph, nor even the manic fervor I'd seen moments before. It was something colder, something emptier. The chalice, however, was different. The pulsing light had vanished, replaced by a dull metallic sheen. But within its depths, something moved. It was a shadow, at first coalescing and swirling like ink in water. Then it took form. A human shape, vaguely feminine, rising slowly from the chalice, as if emerging from a dark pool. It was translucent, ethereal, and yet undeniably present. Its eyes, two burning embers, fixed on me. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't human. It wasn't demonic, in the traditional sense. It was something older, something colder, an entity from a realm beyond human comprehension, drawn forth by the Templars' forbidden ritual. Father Michael lowered his arms, turning towards the spectral figure, with an expression of abject reverence. He knelt before it, his head bowed low. "She has answered," he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible. "The mother has returned." The spectral figure extended a hand towards Father Michael. It wasn't a hand of flesh and bone, but of swirling shadow, and yet, when it touched his head, a shudder ran through his body. He gasped, then collapsed, motionless on the cold stone floor. My mind raced. We had to get out, now. I looked at Thomas, silently urging him to move. He understood. Together, we began to inch backwards, our eyes fixed on the spectral figure, terrified that even the slightest movement might draw its attention. As we reached the archway leading out of the chapel, the figure turned its burning eyes towards us, A low, guttural growl emanated from it, a sound that seemed to claw at the edges of sanity. My blood ran cold. We had been seen. "Run!" I hissed, pushing Thomas ahead of me. We scrambled through the archway and into the darkened corridor. The growl intensified, closer now, echoing through the narrow passage. We didn't look back. We ran, our footsteps echoing in the silence, our hearts pounding in our chests. We ran blindly, through twisting corridors and darkened chambers, the chilling growl pursuing us, always just behind us, a constant reminder of the entity we had unleashed. We didn't know where we were going, only that we had to get away, to escape the Templar's forbidden chapel and the horror it contained. We stumbled into a large, circular chamber, the moonlight filtering in through a high, barred window. In the center of the chamber stood a stone well, its rim worn smooth by centuries of use. There was nowhere else to go. The growl was right behind us. We spun around, bracing ourselves for the inevitable confrontation. The spectral figure emerged from the shadows, its burning eyes fixed on us. It floated towards us, its shadowy form shifting and swirling, radiating an aura of unimaginable cold. We were trapped, cornered, with nowhere left to run. The mother had returned, and we were about to face the consequences of the Templars' forbidden ritual. The chilling growl intensified, filling the chamber, a prelude to what? I didn't want to know. I just wanted it to end, but I knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was only the beginning. I survived a night in the Templar's Forbidden Chapel, part 24 of 25. The chanting intensified, swirling around me like a vortex of whispers. The spectral knights tightened their circle, their ethereal swords shimmering, the points aimed directly at my heart. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that threatened to crush me. My hand, still clutching the broken hilt of the Crusader's sword, trembled uncontrollably. The sliver of the obsidian blade, nestled against my palm, pulsed with a feverish heat. Father Michael, his face a mask of serene malice, floated closer. His eyes, now burning with an unholy light, locked onto mine. "The vessel is ready," he rasped, his voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. "The gate will open." Terror, raw and primal, clawed at my throat. I understood. They weren't just trying to kill me. They were trying to use me. To open something far worse than themselves. I tried to speak, to scream, but my voice was trapped, choked by the oppressive atmosphere. My legs, weak and shaking, refused to obey my desperate commands to flee. I was trapped, a fly, caught in a web of ancient evil. The floor of the chapel began to vibrate, a low, guttural hum resonating through the stone. Cracks snaked across the ancient tiles, spreading outwards from the central altar like a spider web. A chilling wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing the flickering candles and plunging the room into near darkness. The spectral knights, illuminated by their own spectral glow, appeared even more menacing, their forms flickering and distorting, as if struggling to maintain their presence in this shifting reality. From the widening fissures in the floor, a sickly green light pulsed. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of distorted whispers that drilled into my skull. The air grew thick, with the stench of decay and sulfur, making it almost impossible to breathe. Father Michael extended a skeletal hand towards me, his touch promising not comfort, but unimaginable violation. "Embrace your destiny," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my hand. I looked down to see the obsidian shard glowing with an intense white light burning against my skin. It felt different. Not just hot, but alive. A strange energy surged through my arm, coursing through my veins like liquid fire. The obsidian shard vibrated violently, resonating with the growing energy emanating from the cracks in the floor. I felt a surge of unexpected power, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The fear that had paralyzed me began to recede, replaced by a strange sense of purpose. I looked at Father Michael, his triumphant smile faltering as he noticed the change in me. The obsidian shard pulsed brighter, casting my shadow against the wall, distorted and elongated, almost demonic. Driven by a force I couldn't comprehend, I raised my hand, the shard pointing directly at the spectral knights. A blinding beam of white light erupted from the obsidian, striking the nearest knight. The spectral figure shrieked, a sound like tearing silk as its form dissolved into shimmering particles, vanishing into the swirling darkness. The chanting faltered, replaced by gasps of shock from the remaining knights. Father Michael's eyes widened in disbelief. He raised his hands, trying to regain control, but the power flowing through the shard was too strong.